Pharma is not likely going to develop any one of these single molecules because they can't get a patent on it. It takes about $1 billion to get a molecule through preclinical and clinical trials, FDA approval onto the market. Very, very expensive process. None of the major pharmaceutical companies in the neuroscience space are developing cannabinoids. It's a problem, it's a financial one, about bringing these incredibly useful molecules to more widespread use.
So Dr. Swanson, it's a pleasure to finally meet you in person. We've been talking on video call for quite some time, just me getting to learn what you do and all the fascinating stuff that you're doing, especially, we're going to talk about cannabinoids and all that stuff. But before we get into that, just tell us a little bit about your journey into, where you are now.
Oh, well, first of all, thanks for having me, Gil. It's a pleasure to be here. Well, my journey has been a fairly long one. I'm a neurologist, as you know, so I'm also a neuroscientist, having studied a number of brain processes. I've been practicing neurology for about 3 decades, and I mostly specialize in epilepsy, and I'm very interested in cannabinoids.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what you've been studying for quite some time, huh?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. How long have you been studying that again?
I started getting interested in these molecules in about 2009 when I first moved to a medical cannabis state. So prior to that, I really didn't have much interest or knowledge. But since I've moved there, I started researching cannabinoids. Actually, initially thought, boy, this is kind of crazy. People, they want to use pot for all these things. And as I started diving into the science of it, I realized how potent these molecules were.
Now, was this your facility assigning you to this, or is this something you said, hey, I've got an interest in how cannabinoids can affect epilepsy patients, and then they granted you the resources to go ahead and study that? Is that how that works?
Oh, so interesting. I'm independent, so I don't. I've had an independent practice. I run the Montana Comprehensive Epilepsy Program for the state of Montana, and I've been able to pretty much do what I want.
Very cool.
And so the interest in these came from the realization that a number of these things actually work, and they work in symptoms and disease states that there are no other treatments for.
Yeah.
So that's what threw me into this whole area.
What were some of the examples that you saw whenever, you were first looking into this, first started? I'm curious about the transition between you kind of being a naysayer versus a little bit of, what's going on there? Do you remember any of those examples?
I think a big part of that was there were CBD trials going on for epilepsy at the time, actually, with GW Pharma, which is a UK pharmaceutical company, and they established a Carlsbad, California office and developed CBD for epilepsy, which was marketed as Epidiolex. They've since been bought by Jazz Pharmaceuticals. But I think the reading that literature and seeing the efficacy of CBD in epilepsy got me interested in exploring CBD, and then it kind of led into looking at all the 100+ cannabinoid molecules that are found in the plant.
Yeah. What were some of the hesitations that you had with it? Was it just lack of knowledge around it, or was it the wrong knowledge?
Yeah. So there was a lack of knowledge and understanding. There's been a lack of science that's honestly since about 2018 onward has really exploded. My initial thoughts were, okay, patients would come to me and say, I want medical cannabis for this, that. And I thought, pots doesn't affect the EEG, probably doesn't increase seizure frequency. We knew all that. Mm-hmm. And if you want to use, smoke pot, fine, but it doesn't really have any therapeutic, it doesn't have any role in my therapy for patients. And so that was my long-standing thought on it. And also, as a lot of clinicians, I was biased by the fact that, well, if Big Pharma is not developing it, then it can't be a real therapy, which as I now know, is not true.
Right. Yeah. And so, when people, I remember kind of the transition of becoming a naysayer to there's something to this. And I think a lot of it is the stigma around just the psychoactive alterations in like the effects of THC. So now when people are taking these cannabinoids for seizures, are they, for lack of a better term, are they getting high and they're stopping these seizures? What's the difference between these non-psychoactive cannabinoids and THC?
That's a great question. So the plant has hundreds of molecules in it. One of them is THC. That's the psychoactive molecule, the one that causes kind of dissociative effects. It has some hallucinogenic effects, and that kind of gives you the high. There's a whole bunch of other molecules that are not psychoactive. CBD is one of those. So you don't get the psychoactive effect with CBD. All of these molecules have been put into what we call a false frame. People hear cannabis and they think getting high and
Right.
THC. So it's been difficult to re-educate, particularly physicians, that, hey, these are molecules that don't have neurocognitive effects, but they have very potent therapeutic effects.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some of the most well-known non-psychoactive cannabinoids out there? Or I guess the question is, how far have we come? Are they being prescribed by doctors? Are there any over-the-counter non-psychoactive cannabinoids or NPCs for short? Are there any NPCs that you can get over the counter that can help with this? Or what's the path for someone with epilepsy who may want to explore cannabinoids as an option?
Sure. You can get these NPCs, the non-psychoactive cannabinoids, in medical cannabis shops. There's a number of issues, though. They are very, very small doses, non-therapeutic doses. Some of them are 1-2 milligrams, 3-4 milligrams. Therapeutic doses are, hundreds of milligrams.
And the difference between therapeutic and non-therapeutic is therapeutic is prescribed by a doctor, correct? Is that
well, by therapeutic, I mean just the actual dose that you have to take to have an effect.
okay?
So if you're
Gotcha.
taking, for example, naproxen, and it comes in 220 milligrams. If you take 2 milligrams of naproxen, you're probably not going to have an effect on your headache or whatever. So the available dosage formulations for these things are way off. Very, very, number one, they're very low and virtually all over the country. And number two, they're often combined for some reason with other molecules. You'll have THC and CBD and CBN, different combinations of things. There's a lot of reasons for that, but it makes it very difficult to find a single molecule at a high dose. So that's an issue. If you have epilepsy, you can maybe qualify for Epidiolex, but that has just very specific indications that are pretty rare. It's for seizures associated with tuberous sclerosis, Dravet, which is a catastrophic neonatal epilepsy, and then Lennox-Gastaut, which is kind of brain damage epilepsy. Outside of that, it's difficult to get. So then those patients are looking more to getting it outside of prescription form.
And who are the candidates for these NPCs to control seizures?
Oh, golly. So if you look at strict FDA regulated guidelines, you'd have to have an indication that's done, has been achieved through a, double-blinded, placebo-controlled clinical trial that gives you an indication. There's only the indications that I mentioned. But in terms of the literature on what other seizures this could help, there's a whole variety of seizures this can help in both humans and animals. So anyone with epilepsy will probably benefit from CBD.
So are we just waiting for the results to come out for the FDA to actually approve or suggest if you have these certain seizure types that cannabinoids might be the correct pathway?
That's a whole interesting conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So the way these cannabinoids came on the market were not through the FDA pathway. They came on through ballot initiatives in individual states. So the states each marketed and approved, a basket of molecules, the whole plant with hundreds and hundreds of molecules at once. They approved them all. So, of course, you can't get a patent on any of those molecules. So pharma is not likely going to develop any one of these single molecules because they can't get a patent on it. It takes about $1 billion to get a molecule through preclinical and clinical trials, FDA approval onto the market. Very, very expensive process. So I wouldn't be looking to pharma to be developing any of these. And in fact, none of the major pharmaceutical companies in the neuroscience space are developing cannabinoids.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a problem. It's a financial one about bringing these incredibly useful molecules, to more widespread use.
Yeah.
There's a number of other practical problems in using it at even effective doses. So the FDA has certainly approved Epidiolex for those indications, but insurance companies or payers are really reluctant to pay. And to get into therapeutic doses, and this is my experience with patients, trying to get over 10 milligrams per kilogram is very, very difficult. Insurances just don't cover it, and they won't cover any other indications.
Yeah.
So looking for CBD via Epidiolex to get that paid for by your insurance company for epilepsy would be quite difficult unless you have one of those 3 indications.
Correct me if I'm wrong. CBD is the most widely accepted cannabinoid for epilepsy. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's the only one that's approved, but it's, yes, probably the only one that works in epilepsy.
Yeah. And so is that why it's so widely accepted, is because it's the only one proven to work in epilepsy?
Well, for epilepsy, yes, but I think in terms of its general acceptance in neuroscience, it has a variety of other actions that probably make it more widely accepted. And number one would be its clear, potent effects on anxiety. And if you look at epilepsy patients, a big problem in everyone with epilepsy is anxiety. In fact, just about any neurologic disease, there's elevated anxiety. People are walking around, don't know when they're going to have a seizure. Am I going to have one now in the middle of this podcast?
Yeah.
So it causes a lot of anxiety, and things that decrease anxiety will decrease seizures.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. Anxiety is a huge component of the underlying mechanisms of CBD action, and it affects all of the other things that CBD is good for: pain, tremors, muscle spasms, obviously anxiety. So it's an interesting molecule.
Yeah. So what lesser known cannabinoids are out there, if there are out there, and what potential benefits do they have?
Yes. So there are a number of these molecules. Very interesting, these NPC molecules. The ones that are the most widely studied besides CBD would be CBG, which is cannabigerol, cannabichromene, CBC, cannabinol. And there's a couple of other derivatives, cannabidivirin and tetrahydrocannabidivirin, which have these virin molecules attached to them that have a lot of promise. We work in my practice a lot with CBG, CBN, CBD, and CBC. There's lots of interesting literature behind those molecules.
And is that why you focus mainly on those, because of the literature that stands behind it?
Correct. There's a ton of scientific, both preclinical and clinical trial literature on those molecules. And a lot of neurologists, doctors in general, are reluctant to prescribe things that don't have a lot of scientific evidence behind them. They typically rely on, as I mentioned before, pharmaceutical industry to deliver that science. In this case, the pharmaceutical industry is not, but there's a lot of other clinical trials funded by a number of organizations, and the literature on it is huge. So the other thing I might add is that when we're trying to decide about therapeutic options for patients, we're always balancing the risk versus the benefit. Right. So what are the side effects, negative aspects? One of the things I love about these NPCs, they have virtually no side effects at escalating doses. So they're incredibly safe. So it gives me a lower threshold for trying them in neurologic illness.
So that's interesting. So how does it actually work on the endocannabinoid system? I might be butchering that, but how does it work on that system?
So we were talking about the endocannabinoid system. It's one of the most fascinating systems in the brain. So endocannabinoid means there's an endogenous cannabinoid system in the brain. It's genetically it's evolved over time to use these cannabinoids, and the phytocannabinoids, the plant-derived things we're talking about, interact with that system. The only other system that's like that has a plant ligand would be the endogenous opiate system, and I think everyone is fairly aware of that. Mm-hmm. The endocannabinoid system regulates a lot of interesting things. It's the receptors that they bind to, CB1, CB2 receptors, which are part of the endocannabinoid system, are distributed throughout the brain and peripheral nervous system and also in other organs, mainly immunologic derived tissues that have to do with fighting infection and inflammation. But in the brain, they are intimately involved with regulation of anxiety. They're in the areas that anxiety kind of is collated, if you will. That's the hippocampus, amygdala, prefrontal cortex. So they're in areas where we know that affect anxiety. One of the really fascinating areas of endocannabinoid study is that they regulate the blood-brain barrier. So in the blood-brain barrier, stop me if I'm getting too detailed, but
I love it.
The endothelial cells, which line the vessels, have these tight junctions, so they keep things from passing from the blood into the brain, protects a lot of things. And they also, has been recently realized, they can also pump things out of the brain into the blood, things like amyloid beta. These endothelial cells have astrocyte foot processes that surround them, and there's cannabinoid receptors located on those, and they tightly regulate the flow of molecules in and out of the blood. And one of the most important aspects of this whole, what's called the glymphatic system or the glial lymphatic system, is it kind of washes the brain of toxins. So the CSF is produced in the ventricles, and then it's kind of pumped, if you will, by astrocytes for a variety of mechanisms into the lymphatic system in the meninges. And part of this system is this blood-brain barrier. So these compounds, these cannabinoids, particularly CBD and CBG, are responsible for regulating that whole flushing of the brain. In one disease process, Alzheimer's disease, there's an accumulation of amyloid beta intracellularly, and then tau proteins, which are inside the cells. Said that wrong. Extracellular is accumulation of amyloid beta, and the taus are intracellular. This flushing system, lymphatic, flushes all those proteins and bad things and free radicals out. So when that is defective, these proteins accumulate and the toxins accumulate, the blood-brain barrier breaks down. So the cannabinoids are incredibly effective, these NPCs, in neuroinflammation and obviously neurodegenerative conditions.
And so that would be epilepsy would be one of those too.
There isn't a pathogenetic mechanism for these toxic proteins in epilepsy. Epilepsy has been thought to be more of a electrical problem, so there's little shorts in the brain. So you've touched upon one of the interesting things about NPCs. They have a variety of actions that are separate from each other. So the CBD's effect on epilepsy is via basically stopping neurotransmission. It's a very potent, it's binds to these presynaptic receptors, blocks neurotransmitter release, and shuts down neurotransmission. And very interestingly, one of the mechanisms of CBD is it blocks there's a number of mechanisms that we think help in epilepsy. One is it blocks a bidirectional nucleoside transporter of adenosine. We'll probably talk more about adenosine. Adenosine is a potent, the brain's potent anticonvulsant, also involved in other things like sleep. So CBD it works on those sites. It has an inotropic effect, transient receptor potentials that have to do with a lot anxiety. It has a number of other binding sites. So in summary, it has lots of different mechanisms, which is why it can be used in a number of different conditions.
Okay, so for those who might not necessarily be well-versed in medical terminology, essentially what you're saying is these cannabinoids bind to these neuroreceptors, which are on the end of a neuron, and it's creating an environment where electricity can't pass through as much as it normally would without these, right? And so for seizures, that's important because a seizure is abnormal and excessive firing of electricity in between neurons. So that's essentially what you're saying. And one of the mechanisms of action is what we say is that it binds to or might stop it in many different ways. So what you're saying is there might be many different mechanisms of action that these cannabinoids are, how they're being effective.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. There's several mechanisms, and they shut down brain activity through some parallel mechanisms. That's correct.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about terpenes. First, explain to me what terpenes are. I have no clue.
So terpenes, there's about 55,000 terpenes. They are basically molecules that have a similar chemical structure with carbon and hydrogens. Think rubber.
Okay.
Tires. So that's a terpene. These are molecules that are basically hydrocarbons. Think gasoline, these things. So they have a very low threshold for evaporation. They evaporate very quickly. These are molecules in terms of the cannabis plants that are, again, they have a low boiling point. They're mainly odorant molecules, so they impart the sense of smell. That's why an orange smells orange. And in terms of the cannabinoids, the flowering part of the plant that makes all these trichomes contains a lot of these terpenes. So people will smell the flower and they smell all this different stuff. Those things evaporate over time. So you can smell them very, very high, very pungent in a freshly cut flower, any flower. And then over time, they kind of dissipate. They do have actions in the brain, interestingly, the terpenes. So you'll hear a lot about, the terpenes in the plant are having these effects and they contribute to this entourage effect, which is a whole nother conversation. But not likely, in my opinion, having much to do with the therapeutic effects because number one, the highest concentration are in the freshly cut flowers. So you'd have to somehow get those. And then people are usually smoking that. So they're kind of burning up the hydrocarbons as they're smoking it. But there's a lot of lay, not so much literature, but there's a lot of talk about how important these terpenes are. But therapeutically, we can't really manufacture potent terpenes and give them, in a daily dosage, say, as we can with the cannabinoids.
So in theory, they would be helpful, but it's just capturing them and being able to administer them is the problem.
It is a problem. Some of the terpenes bind to the cannabinoid receptor, but at a way low affinity, maybe 10% or less of what THC might do. And again, getting the concentration of that terpene at those receptors in the brain would be very problematic and probably doesn't happen.
Okay. Well, Dr. Swanson, I think this is such an interesting topic, especially for, I think, patients who might be listening that are interested in taking, a different pathway to controlling their seizures, or maybe they're drug resistant. First, I want to ask before we close, how are these CBDs being administered? Are they in pill form? Are they in, gummies? Do you smoke it? Tell us a little bit about how these patients are digesting these CBDs.
Sure. So, and by CBD, I think you probably mean any of the
Any of the
NPCs,
yeah.
right? They're available in a variety of formulations. Keep in mind they're lipid soluble molecules, so they need to be solubilized in oil. So most often you'll find them in oil, drops of oil. We actually manufacture them. I'm involved with a company called Esteemed Science. We manufacture them in gel caps and olive oil. So you can take them gel caps, gummies. Obviously, you can smoke the stuff any way you can imagine. There's also CBD creams.
Now, can you smoke it without getting the THC psychoactive effect?
Sure. You can get plants that have no THC in it. They manufacture genetically engineered flower that just makes only CBG or only CBD.
Oh, wow.
Pretty hard to find. Those are kind of research is not available at your kind of medical cannabis store. So mostly we don't recommend smoking. We recommend taking them in gel caps because of the formulation. In olive oil, it's a long chain triglyceride. It's probably the best absorbed. Absorption's a problem. Only about 10% of these cannabinoids that you take are actually absorbed. So trying to increase absorption is one of the big areas of research. In terms of availability, it's a real problem. If you want to go to get these products, you have to either find a physician that makes them, manufactures them, and there are some around the country. We are one group that does that. Getting them from a medical cannabis shop is problematic for a couple of reasons. They're not highly regulated. It varies state by state. The concentrations can vary from month to month. The product availability can vary from month to month. And there are a lot of toxic contaminants within these because it is just not a very highly regulated industry. So I don't recommend patients get these at medical cannabis shops. In addition, it's hard to find an adequate dose.
Yeah. Now, where do you see the future of cannabinoid research going and how that actually plays into the mainstream medicine?
That's a great question, Gil. In my opinion, in what I'm seeing in drug development in the research is because it's not likely, you can't get a patent for one of the single molecules. Most of the interesting research is looking at molecule combinations, CBD plus steroids, CBD plus some other molecule that would work in combination. If one can find that, they can then get a patent and market it. Without a patent and the ability to market it, it gets difficult to bring that drug to a wide market.
Okay. All right. Okay. So last question before we stop. And again, thank you so much for joining us. Absolutely. I know this is a topic that a lot of people are interested in. So for those who are interested in it, how can they learn a little bit more about cannabinoids as an option? Where does one start from the very beginning of, hey, I'm actually interested in this? What are some resources out there?
Obviously literature searches, but for most of the lay people out there, they're not going to understand all of that complex literature. I have a company that I've been involved with. It's with physicians and scientists called Sativa Science. We provide a lot of information. We have
where can they find that?
Sativa.science. That's our our website. We can maybe post that or publish that for people.
Yeah.
And we provide these cannabinoids and a lot of information for patients. We have town hall series, webinar series, and plus we provide really medical grade cannabinoids for patients.
So thank you for coming and sitting down with me and talking about this, and looking forward to the other episodes.
Awesome, Wayne. Thank you. I appreciate you having me.